I think the fact that this spanned the spectrum of moderate Democrats to very progressive Democrats was incredibly rewarding and exciting to me, because I've been trying to make the case in the face of, well, I mean, I had to close my Twitter DMs at one point, let's put it that way, right? I've been trying to make the case that this must be bipartisan. Like, it is extremely important that we not, give up on Democrats. And even after the whole, 2022, Sam stuff, when Democrats were very understandably skittish, we at CCI did not give up on them. We were like, listen, that is a thing that happened. We need to own that happened as an industry. We need to kind of contextualize it appropriately, right? And talk about what that meant and didn't mean about the industry and how the technology operates and all that kind of thing. But we're not giving up on Democrats.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unchained, your no-hype resource for all things crypto. I'm your host, Laura Shin, author of The Cryptopians. I started covering crypto 9 years ago, and as a senior editor at Forbes, was the first mainstream media reporter to cover cryptocurrency full-time. This is the May 28th, 2024 episode of Unchained. Deploy custom crypto strategies and boost your yield with perpetual options on Vaultcraft, the universal DeFi adapter for supercharging your crypto. With version v1.5, users can now earn options on Optimism and Arbitrum while also rebalancing multi-strategy yield products all in one vault. Learn more on vaultcraft.io. Polkadot is the original and leading Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. And the Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem, making it faster, more secure, and adaptable. Perfect for GameFi and DeFi to build, grow, and scale. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. Today's guest is Sheila Warren, CEO of the Crypto Council for Innovation. Welcome, Sheila.
Hey, Laura. Thanks for having me.
You were a driving force in Wednesday's House vote for the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, being called FIT 21. And it was the first time that a chamber of Congress had voted for comprehensive crypto legislation. So congratulations.
Thanks.
And I definitely want to go into a lot of detail on that. But I was realizing, I feel like this achievement is best appreciated if we go back to May 8th. At that time, things looked very different. There was this SEC Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 that basically made it impossible for financial institutions to get in on the crypto game, to do things like custody crypto assets for the Bitcoin ETFs. And both the crypto and banking industries had been lobbying to overturn it. And so on that day, the House was set to vote on overturning it, and the White House released a statement saying that if Congress did vote to overturn it, that the president would veto that vote. So tell us, at that point, what was your sense, from your work of what the overall attitude was toward crypto in Washington and the overall stance on crypto policy?
Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying that Washington is not monolithic, right? And so the view on that would depend very much on who you asked. I think it was definitely disappointing, to say the least, that the White House felt the need to say anything, frankly, about SAB 121 and about the CRA that was up.
Oh, and when you say that, do you mean that it's not typical for the White House to come out and say in advance they will veto something if it's voted in?
It's not atypical, but this is to put this in perspective, this is a staff accounting bulletin. This was not, and the issues here that, to your point, both the banking and crypto industries had around this, some of them were process related. The way that this was promulgated did not go through an ordinary, public notice period with comments and whatnot. But some of them were about, as you noted, like just the outcome of this, which would make it functionally impossible for banks to basically, hold digital assets, custody qualified digital assets. So the bottom line with this is there were a number of things wrong with it, but it's still, all things considered, a pretty small thing, right? Compared to like FIT 21, which is this massive effort. It was gonna, it went through committees, it had a lot of different process around it, all of that. This was kind of a more subtle thing. And so the White House always has choices. They can come out and give a neutral statement. They can come out and give a statement in support. They can give a statement in light opposition, or they can say they're going to veto. And so it was disappointing that the veto option was the one that was chosen on something that, to our knowledge, the White House hadn't really been paying a ton of attention to be frank, right? It wasn't like this was something they had been talking about for a long time and, this is, we got to keep this or whatnot. They hadn't really taken a view. So to come out and say that they would veto was, again, I'll use the word disappointing. It was Was it surprising? I don't know, right? Because this White House had quite a few things to say about crypto-related topics. So I don't think anyone expected silence, but I think there was some hope that perhaps they would take the sort of lightly opposed kind of view, as opposed to saying, nope, can't let this happen, not going to happen, not on our watch, which is what they did.
So then what's so fascinating is, of course, in a way, looking back, we can say this is like maybe where the avalanche started or something, because eventually the House did vote to overturn SAB 121. And in fact, 21 Democrats crossed party lines to support that repeal. So were you involved in that effort at all? But even if not, like, how do you think that defeat affected the White House's stance?
Yeah. So in the Senate, we were asked for our opinion about this. The opinion was very clear. It was very consistent across a variety of actors. I think anybody in industry who was asked about this had the same view. And again, I think the banks did take the lead on a lot of this because in their interest, they want to have the ability to run business the way that they see fit, right? And this had, again, the process footfalls, the substantive ramifications and issues. So it was kind of driven and led by that, and by some actors in the Senate who had put this forth, who had said, this is not the way you make law. We can't do this, including Senator Lummis and her team.
Oh, wait, I'm confused. I thought that on May 8th, that was the House vote to overturn SAB 21. Was I mistaken? Was that the Senate vote?
That was the Senate vote. I'm checking dates because dates mean nothing to me right now. What day is today? I have no idea.
Yeah. And then I thought, because that was the same day as the Trump dinner. And then I thought the week after on May 16th is when the Senate.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
I was thinking, you're right. May 8th was multiple weeks ago, not last
right.
week. Like I said, every day is like a year. Yes, correct. But this was a Senate-driven thing, right? So the Senate had basically come out and said, we think that a couple of things. This is not the way that you make law. It's another example of regulation by enforcement. Everyone who listens to your show is very familiar what that phrase means. We won't go into detail about that. It's this concept, well, I guess I will go into detail. The concept that there is a process by which rules become law when it comes to administrative agencies. And in this case, this was put out through, again, this thing called a staff accounting bulletin. It's kind of more of a notice than going through an actual formal process. So the Senate took issue with that. The House also obviously took issue with that. So on the same day, in advance of the House vote, the White House came out and said, this is something that we do not support. And if it passes Congress, we will actually veto it. So that, I think, and on that same day, again, to your point, later in the day, former President Trump down at Mar-a-Lago made some statements and said some words about crypto that certainly trended positive or indicated his openness to digital assets and to the importance and his recognition, it seemed, or acknowledgement of the importance of their staying in the United States. People can interpret those comments however they like. They are well available online, but there's no question that there was a distinction between the Biden White House and they're saying they were going to veto the 721 situation, and Trump at the very same day, later in the day, saying crypto seems great. Let's do it. Let's go. So
yeah. Well, I mean, he literally just invited people. He said, if you support crypto, then vote for me. And I wondered, because of what happened later, where eventually, obviously, we know the end of the story, which is that the White House ended up at least taking some actions that were more supportive of crypto than outright hostile to it. I wonder how much of a calculus or how much of the calculus changed for the White House because of what happened with Trump or because of what happened with these votes. I was curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, people have, who can say, what influences what? It's all part of a big ecosystem. Okay. So I think the linearity some folks are drawing between Trump saying, hey, crypto, yeah, vote for me, et cetera. I'm going to be this guy. I think that line is a lot less direct than people think. I actually think that what we saw here was the White House realizing that Democrats, contrary to what I believe that some people, again, the White House also not a monolith. Okay. So some people in the White House who I think have been quite anti-crypto and some of them quite overtly, but most people in the White House are pretty neutral on this issue. They have a million things to deal with, right? So they're just pretty open. They don't know much about it. But I think there was a sense or a perception that Democrats by and large were against this technology. And I think I'll say it that boldly. And I think that proved to be not true at all. And the votes demonstrated that. And to be fair, people say all kinds of things. You don't really know where anyone stands until they're put to the test through a vote. And so when you get numbers like we saw on these various different bills that have come through, it's impossible to deny that this is bipartisan and has bipartisan support. I mean, it's literally impossible looking at the numbers. And so I do think that that was what affected the White House, was this recognition, oh, this isn't something that the party believes, right? This is something that some people believe, but other people really do not believe this. Therefore, maybe we should be taking a step and looking at this. And I actually think that was more influential than whatever said on the campaign trail, because people say all kinds of things on the campaign trail, and there are all kinds of issues where Trump is saying words and Biden saying words that are very different words. And I personally am not convinced that this particular thing was what would cause such a rapid change in positioning. But it is no question that it's all part of one big ecosystem. And I'm sure there are some people for whom that was a very significant moment and the most significant moment. But I think for most people, it was counting the votes and seeing that there is not just certain support by a couple of people. There's pretty widespread support across the entire party for the concept that digital assets are important and should stay onshore in the United States.
Yeah, I think so. When we go to the next week, to my mind, that is when we see the two events. It's the May 16th vote in the Senate, followed by the reversal on the ETH ETF approvals. Those two, to my mind, are the kind of key moments to look at. So just, on that May 16th vote, which we kind of touched on a little bit, but, one key point that I want to pull out is first, well, actually you educate me. My perception is that maybe it is easier to get something like that passed in the House just because there's more people, there's like more options of like how things could go. And then the Senate is just harder because you only have a set number. And so, there's just a little less room to wiggle. It's kind of like the people that you're targeting are like a fixed, it's like a sort of fixed number. But the thing, that I wanted to highlight was that one of the people that crossed party lines to overturn SAB 21 in the Senate was House Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you thought the significance of that was and just generally that vote in the Senate in terms of, the about face we eventually saw.
Yeah, sure. So I do think Senate Majority Leader Schumer, again, I wouldn't say he was crossing over. I think he voted the way he felt was right? And so his views on this, I think, had been evolving at a pretty rapid clip. Like everyone's views had been evolving. A lot of education was happening over the course of the last 2 years, but certainly when there's a specific thing that's coming up before them, they're educated about it. If you're going to take a vote on something, that's when you really start to focus on what the thing is, right? And which way you're going to vote. So this idea that there was all this changing and all this, I think what people miss, and I think this is really important to state, is that there are some people in Congress, both in the House and the Senate and in the White House, who have very strong views about crypto. Most people to date have a pretty neutral view about it. They just don't really know that much, right? They're not on financial services committee, they're not on the ag committee, they're on some other committees, judiciary, whatever, ways and means. Like they have a whole slate of things they are focusing on, right? So their knowledge and awareness of this is pretty light. Like it's not their core topic. And I know that for all of us in the industry, we're like, this is the most important thing on anyone's plate at any time. I mean, that's the job, right? But these people have like broad books of things they have to focus on. So the idea that they have these really strongly held positions and, Democrats are against crypto or Republicans are for crypto, it's just not true, right? Now, to the extent people tend to vote with their party, which is definitely the case, we're all voters, okay? Who among us has not gone to a ballot and been like, well, I don't know, so-and-so endorsed that thing, I guess I'll go with that, as opposed to doing our own research. That, of course, happens. That's human nature, right? There is an element of that that's true. But it doesn't mean that someone who's never paid attention to these issues has a strong view that cannot be molded, I guess, to some extent, right? By getting actual accurate information in, right? And so that's what a lot of our effort over the last 2 weeks was about here at CCI and with allies that we were working with, was trying to get some of those folks that hadn't necessarily been paying much attention to this, but knew it was getting a lot of attention, to educate them about what is this? What is this? What's the industry? Why is it so dramatic? Why is everyone so seemingly nuts? Okay, so that's an important point to land.
And wait, when you say that, are you saying that those were people in the Senate or people in the White House?
All over Washington, right? Like there are a lot of folks that have a lot of things going on. And when it comes down to a floor vote, everyone gets a vote, right? Committee is one thing. In committee, it's your jurisdiction. You need to understand this. It's your responsibility to be educated about it. It's a different thing. You're on a committee, right? It's like if I'm on a I don't know, if I'm on a school board, I got to know about the school policies in that area, right? That doesn't mean I'm on the water board of the same area. I don't know anything about that, So that's how it works. But when it comes time to a floor vote, everybody gets a vote. So suddenly you've got people that are like, oh, well, that's coming up. And let's remember, I also want to contextualize, as you said something about the House and the Senate. Let's look at what's going on in this house. Okay. This is a house. This is not an ordinary House of Representatives we've got going on here. I'll go back to the Kevin McCarthy vote, which again, like dates mean nothing to me. I literally have not slept in like days, but like dates mean nothing to me. But regardless, that was not that long ago. You'll know what the dates were around that. Then you had Speaker Johnson. You had Marjorie Taylor Greene trying to get Speaker Johnson out of there. It's a very dramatic place, but it's not a place that has moved a ton forward. Okay. So to be very clear, so we're not looking at kind of an ordinary time in political history where things are very measured and sedate and gentlemanly and gentlewomanly debates are being had, right? You've got like memes, you've got people shouting at each other. I mean, it's really insulting each other's personal appearances, which happened last week or maybe this week. I can't remember, whatever, recently that happened. This is the situation, okay? So I tell you all that context simply to say, the fact that this vote was so bipartisan, was so successful, was so overwhelmingly and resoundingly in favor of paying it at a minimum, paying attention to the digital asset industry and taking it seriously. No matter who you are, where you fall, what you think about the bill, not the bill, there is no question that is what this vote, both votes, all the votes, the Senate vote, the House vote, all of these votes demonstrated. Like that's what this is, okay? And that is why I think we are so proud. I'm so proud of my team. And who, again, like, I think if you got anyone on my team what date it was or what day of the week it was, we would have no idea regardless. I think I'm so proud of the effort because it's borne fruit and it has landed this industry as an industry that is relevant to American consumers and investors, that has benefits to the American economy and the global economy, that is laying the way for American leadership. All those things I think are now not really in question. Now, also, views are going to continue to evolve. Now that folks are paying attention to this, they had to vote on it, right? Now that they're paying attention, they've taken a position. Now we kind of know, okay, so who might be the next generation of folks who really start to get very interested in this stuff that maybe we're kind of like, I don't really know what that is before, but now we're like, I've learned more about that and I really find that fascinating. And going into the next Congress, some of those people are going to wind up being the new folks who are the ones who make passionate statements on the floor, right? Or the ones who actually help refine the language in a bill. All of that is kind of also part of what we're all looking at and thinking about as we move into the next Congress and get to this election process.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, just looking at it from the outside, I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting that the majority leader voted against, what the president said. And, I don't follow politics actually very well. Like when you were saying stuff about Kevin McCarthy, I was like, oh, right, I saw a headline about that. But I actually don't really follow it very closely.
Fair enough. Probably better for your mental health. I'm going to just put that out there. I mean, it's like,
yeah, well, that's kind of why I don't follow it. But on Monday, I actually was scheduled to record an interview, a podcast with Eric Balchunas. And literally in the seconds before he, gets on, he found out that he had confirmation from more than one source that the ETFs looked like they were being reversed. Yeah. And so, what do you think kind of caused that shift? I mean, it's a dramatic shift. So what do you think happened there?
Yeah. I'll say something else, which is it's really fun to come up with conspiracy theories. And it's really fun to imagine that there's this hotline, that people have to each other. And they're like, hey, this thing's happening over here. And, Trump is getting traction. So, hey, Gary, you got to do this thing for me. I mean, this is not how this works. Okay. So the reality, I think, is that, I'll tell you what I know and I'll tell you what I believe, okay, which are different things. And there are folks who know more because they track the SEC very, very closely. I have people on my team that do that. So, but what I think we all know is that there was a lot of back and forth happening at the SEC, okay, among the commissioners about this topic.
Just like after those votes, or do you mean like this whole time? Because
the whole time, this entire time, it completely separately, this entire time, right? So, and after Bitcoin ETFs, of course, right? So you saw the note that came from Gary. Some people call that the capitulation of Gary. I would just say Gary saw the writing on the wall and the reality of what had been said previously about Bitcoin being a commodity, et cetera, right? And so kind of was like, look, the ship has sailed here. We just got to close the loop essentially, right? And did that.
You were talking about the statement he released after the approvals for the Bitcoin ETFs?
That's right. Right. I mean, we all read it, right? So this kind of like, well, I don't really have a choice, boo, whatever. But here we are. Okay. So there was a similar conversation happening around this because there is ambiguity around ETH, and there has been, right? That people go back and forth. And again, like Eric, I'm sure talked about this on your show. Is it a commodity? Is it not? Is it what is it? And I do think that it wasn't a slam dunk, super settled thing. Okay. So the timing of this, I do think is related. The outcome here, I don't know if it's related. The idea that you're suddenly going to switch policy on something as major as this because of politics, look, people love that story and they love kind of telling the narrative that way. That's not usually how this works. Okay, these people have jobs. They are accountable to each other. They do take their jobs seriously. Whether we agree with the way they do them is a different question. But I don't think, people are here for people are in jobs for all kinds of reasons. Can I put it that way? But on this one, we know that there was a lot of back and forth, and there were people within the SEC who had a very strong view, right, about the ETH ETF, Bitcoin ETFs, that these were similar and that they should be allowed to proceed and that we should actually have more TradFi engaging in the assets. So that was a conversation happening. Now, like I said, the timing of it is they can choose when they release news. And I tend to always believe and be a conspiracy theorist around the timing of releases to be beneficial for other reasons. Okay. So I don't know when this decision was made. I actually don't have any visibility line of sight into that. But I think the timing of when it was announced is not a coincidence. I think in the middle of all of this, seeing some, positive movement and some acknowledgement of the crypto industry's value, which again is how I would take the ETH ETF decision. I actually think that is relevant. And I do think, so that's what I believe. Now, again, what anyone knows, these are pretty closed agencies. That's part of the problem here. People are saying it's supposed to be more transparent and public, the way you make, rules and all that kind of stuff. And part of the challenge the industry has been having is that a lot of this has been happening behind closed doors and people don't have an insight into the process around how some of the rules are made, not ETH ETFs, but other things, right? Like SAB 121 is a great example of that, right? But yeah, so that's what I would say.
Okay, I don't know if I even fully follow. So you were saying that they probably were having a back and forth over it, for some extended period of time, and maybe the vote, like if the dial had been slightly to the no position, then the SAB votes suddenly pushed it slightly to the yes position or something.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not even drawing a connection between those things, right? I'm saying that I don't know if the outcome would have changed here because I think it's the right outcome, right? So to be very clear, I think that the logical outcome is what happened here, right? I think we all think that. So I like to believe that outcome would have been the outcome because...
Wait, so you think the SEC intended this whole time to approve the Bitcoin?
Do not. I think there was a big fight happening about what to do. I think there was a lot of discussion happening about what to do, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And I think that's just normal. That's a normal part of the process. Some of that becomes made public. You have various commissioners talking sometimes after the fact about decisions that were made and how they felt or didn't feel or whatnot, right? So all of that is a normal part of the process of going about, in this case, it wasn't a commission level, but all of this is part of a process. And there's people that are working the thing and deciding and looking at precedent and what's going to mean for the markets. All of that analysis is happening, right? I think the idea that this is just a knee-jerk thing and the SEC decides one way or the other, there is some process. It's just not a public process. Okay, so that was happening all along. I do think that the tides turning had an impact on the eventual decision. I do believe that. But I think what it had more of an impact on was the timing of announcing the decision, right? Like when to go public with, this is what we've decided, right?
Oh, they didn't go public on Monday. They reached out to the
hinted. That's my point.
Issuers.
That's my point though, right? There's a choice about when to time that. The minute they did that, it was pretty public. Let's be real, right? The minute that they did that, everyone knew it was going to get, I don't know if leaked is the right word, but it was going to get shared. Everyone's going to have a sense, right? Why Monday as opposed to next Monday or 2 Mondays ago or 3 Mondays from now or whatever, right? I think the timing of things is often related. And so I think that there was a desire, and again, I'm speculating here, but it would not surprise me, let's say, if there was a desire to signal, oh, hey, this thing is coming. It's not all bad news. Here it is, right? Look, we're open-minded or whatever the symbol that they were trying to signal. I have no idea. I'm not in these people's minds. But bottom line is, I always tend to look at things and the timing of things and say, that's an interesting time for that move to have been made, as opposed to any other time that it could have happened in sort of the last month or the next month or whatever, right? That's what I think is interesting. So,
I just, it couldn't have happened next month because the deadline was Thursday. So it had to, they were running out of time, basically.
On Monday, basically saying, hey, hi, right? Hey, everyone, adjust right now. I don't know. Like that's the part that I think is interesting. But does it affect the outcome? Did all of this stuff with, SAB and Trump and everybody else? I mean, yeah, of course, right? Like everything happens in one ecosystem. It's no one's like immune or
Yeah.
blind to what's happening in other parts of the ecosystem, right? It's
Yeah.
just more like how big did they go? Who did they ask? What was the signal? All of that stuff, right, is interesting because it became a really active part of the conversation, as you know, because Eric got that news right before he went on your show, right? So that
Yes.
suddenly became a very, very, very big talking point in the middle of a lot of folks focusing on crypto who wouldn't normally focus on crypto. For the industry, it always would have been a big reveal. But a lot of
Right.
other people in the financial ecosystem were focusing on crypto at that moment in time, right? And it just added more to the sort of general awareness that, like, okay, this industry is making waves, making moves.
Yeah. Okay. So, meanwhile, I am so interested to know what was happening in your life during that time, because obviously, so the vote for your bill happened on May 22nd. So this was so if the hint that the ETH ETFs was going to go through happened on Monday the 20th, then Wednesday the 22nd was the vote for your bill, and then the May 23rd on Thursday was the ETFs getting their initial approval. So during this whole time, like, what were you doing? When did you even compose the bill? Then how did it, what did your life look like in order to get it actually passed?
Yeah. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. Okay. So at the end of the day, the people who hold the pen on the bill are on the Hill. It's Hill staffers who hold the pen, right? So the idea that anyone in industry ever writes a bill, I think there's like this perception out there that like people just kind of like write a bill and take it in. And they're like, here's a bill. That's not how this works. So it's really it's a number of people on the Hill. I mean, it's bipartisan people, Henry staffers, Paul Bolzano, people in Nichols' office. There were a lot of people that were holding pen on this bill. And again, this particular bill, Fit 21, had been around for a while. Okay, so it was there was a version of it all the way back to 22 that had kind of been around and about and whatnot. Okay. And so for us, we were informed, we the industry were informed that there was a new version of it that had been, we all knew it had been being negotiated, et cetera, right? But there was a new version of it coming out that dropped on a Friday. Don't ask me dates, as is obvious. I have no idea what date it was, but we were told that evening. We were given a readout of what it contained, like an oral readout of what it contained, us and our members. So we had the weekend to kind of process that and think about what's our position on this, how do we feel about it. We realized we were supportive of it for a variety of reasons. And from there, it's just like all systems go, right? So what we realized we wanted to do pretty quickly was we felt we needed to have broad industry support for this and to say, like, this is something the industry's been asking, again, for regulatory clarity for a very long time. This bill, while not perfect, covers a lot of ground that we have been asking about. A lot of it is pretty intact to what the previous version was. Some of it's changed. Of course, we all had to analyze all the changes, right? And every individual firm had to make a decision. Does this bill work for me or not? For us, we're an industry association. We represent the broad industry, not any individual firm. And so for us, we were like, this is definitely a giant, significant move on behalf of industry. It's going to move things tremendously forward in ways that are really important. So what do? Well, you spin up a gigantic effort. So every single day there were Scrum type calls for those who are developers. There were Scrum type calls. What's everyone hearing? What are we doing? How are we feeling? All this kind of stuff. We pulled together. We wrote actually and drafted a coalition letter that got released, where we basically pulled the draft of that together. Here's what we want to say about the bill. Here's how our position is on it. That was all discussed across a variety, a bunch of different actors. Do we strongly support it? Do we support it? Do we put all of this? Right? We came to agreement. We then went around drumming up signatures. So I was on the phone with all day long, every day, all day. I was talking to people in the House, right, trying to get them to support the bill. We were focusing our effort a lot on the Democrats because we wanted to have a really strong showing of bipartisan support. That was extremely important to me personally, but also to the industry. So I personally was on the phone with a ton of Democrats, including some that actually I hadn't spoken to before, to the points we talked about earlier, right? Who were suddenly like, oh, there's a vote. I better figure out what's going on there. So we were able to get into some offices and it kind of been like, sure, I don't really care about that though. So thank you very much. I was able to get to members of Congress. I was talking to a lot of these folks and then also talking to industry and saying, we need to show up. So we were really proud of the coalition we got together. And when I say me, I mean, it's Team CCI, right? So this is a very small team, to be very clear, compared to a lot of organizations. Like if you look at banking or you look at oil and gas or whatever it is. Like they have like massive, gigantic organizations, right? We're a tiny organization, all in. So everyone on my team.
How many people do you have?
In Washington, we have 5, right? We're focusing on 5 people. And of that, it's really like 3 of us that were the ones who were going out and doing a lot of the sort of calling and wrangling and all of that, right? Well, 4, I should say 3.5, 4. And that was in coordination, right? We were like, our members and everybody else were like, okay, who's talking to whom? How are we doing all this? So you go out and you try to educate people about the bill, why it matters, why we support it, why it supports it. But I think the most significant thing we did, because that's all normal around a bill, like that's what every industry does. I think the most significant thing that I was I did not know if we could get it done, to be perfectly honest, but to get that industry coalition letter signed, to get 6 alliances across the top of it, to get a total of 59, almost 60 signatories to it, some of the biggest names in the business, folks who are competitors with each other, all saying, yes, we support this. We really encourage people, members of the House, to vote in favor of it. And that to me was a huge accomplishment. I mean, as you well know, Laura, this is not an industry that is, kumbayaing on a regular basis. Like we're not all holding hands and, smoking the peace pipe, right? So the fact that we were able to get that alignment and to get people to agree to a piece of paper that they all signed off on, right? I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm still a little bit flabbergasted about how I don't ever really know how we pulled it off. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm incredibly proud of it. And I think it was just us saying, this is the moment. Like this is the moment we have been asking for. It is crucially important that this be, again, a bipartisan effort, that we support people like Patrick McHenry, right? Who is deeply educated about this technology, spent a lot of time learning about it and listening to people. And I'll tell you, honestly, Laura, my take on this was, at some point you have to trust that somebody who has been listening, who's been paying attention for such a long time, who's met with so many people in the industry, right? Who is known to the industry, who's had an open door policy around things. At some point you have to trust that he was negotiating the best language he could get, right? Like he was really out there, his staff and his team, they were all out there talking to everyone they could talk to. And of course, GT Thompson's staff on the ag side, and of course, the other folks on the Democratic side who were helpful with this, that they were all working as really, really, really hard. It's not just us who are working hard, right? It's all those staffers on the Hill and all those members of Congress who were working so hard to come up with language that they really thought could get through, right? So, and that's one thing I think people also miss on the outside. And, it's funny because I still think of myself as on the outside because, but I'm obviously not on the outside. But I think it's that it's a compromise, right? Like sausage making is sausage making. It's not pretty. All kinds of random things if you look at any bill, leave our industry completely aside. Look at any bill that comes through. It's got all kinds of weird things in it, right? Some of this is like, it's called pork or whatever, or like just gimmies, or like, hey, I'm only going to vote for this thing if this totally unrelated thing gets put into it, right? That's how law is made. And it's not pretty and it's kind of weird, but that's the reality. And so on some level, it's not that you get anything. No bill is ever going to reflect a perfect understanding or reflection of reality, of what's actually happening in any industry or in any moment in time, because it's always going to be a compromise. And sometimes we don't, as outsiders to the Hill, we don't have line of sight into exactly what people are asking for or what those negotiations look like in a real-time way, right? So like I say, I'm extremely proud of the effort. I'm extremely proud of the team. It's just some of the most hardworking people I've ever worked with, and that's a very high bar. But I am particularly proud of the fact that we were able to bring the industry together in coalition and to sign one letter and to say, this is a statement from all these different, membership organizations, but also all these different firms that are aligned in support of this. Because I think that made a huge difference. I know it did. It made a huge difference.
Yeah. So in a moment, we're going to talk a little bit more about what the discussions with the lawmakers were like. But first, a quick word from the sponsors who make the show possible. Deploy custom crypto strategies and boost your yield with perpetual options on Vaultcraft, the universal DeFi adapter for supercharging your crypto. With version v1.5, users can now earn options on Optimism and Arbitrum while also rebalancing multi-strategy yield products all in one vault. You can also gamify your experience with Vaultron, Vaultcraft's NFT reward optimizer, to earn even more XP points. From institutional service providers to DeFi degens, anyone can deposit into Vaultcraft's products to instantly start earning yield on their crypto. Go to vaultcraft.io and join the referral program to start earning rewards with the community today. Polkadot is the original and largest Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. And the anticipated Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem, upgrading the infrastructure with 8 times higher transaction throughput and twice as fast block times, perfectly tailored core time for the needs of every protocol, trustless bridges internally and into Ethereum, Cosmos, Near, Binance Smart Chain, and revised tokenomics and the implementation of a token burn to reduce inflation. Perfect for GameFi and DeFi to build, grow, and scale with one of the most active crypto communities in the space. Polkadot recently announced a partnership with Mythical Games, bringing top games like NFT Rivals with over 650,000 players and 43 million transactions to pave the way for GameFi and the Polkadot ecosystem. Get your Web3 ideas to market fast with economics that work for you. Think big, build bigger with Polkadot. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. Back to my conversation with Sheila. So, you said that you were focusing a lot of your conversations on the Democrats, and I wondered, what were their concerns? What were their hesitations? What were the conversations like? And then which arguments did you find tended to be persuasive with them?
Yeah. So over the course of the period of time we were talking to them, things shifted, right? Because again, this bill dropped. It's very dense, it's got a lot of text. So as offices started to wrestle with it and wrangle with it, different questions came up. So it's a very fluid process. And it's not that there's one argument you use the entire time. Like things evolve. It's a very dynamic situation, right? So I would say the first thing you do in a situation like this is you call the folks that you know are on side, right? So you call the drafters of the bill, you call the folks that really understand the space really well, and you say to them, who else should I talk to? Who else might I speak with that might be interested or might want to hear from someone like me specifically? And here's where I think it's important to note it's always a team effort. So the people that are going to really appreciate hearing from someone like me are different from the folks who are going to appreciate hearing from someone who is, very differently politically oriented or has a different frame on things, right? And so determining like, who am I best situated to speak with? And I decided, and my team decided in my particular case, we have people that can speak on, who are securities experts, right? Which I'm not a securities expert. They can talk to some folks, right? There's some folks who have worked in Congress and can kind of like get in with staff in certain ways. They can talk to certain folks, right? I can talk to certain folks. I'm a California Democrat. I can talk to certain folks who will open a door to me and really listen, when I say something because the credibility I bring with that particular friend. So you're always thinking about who's the right person to deliver the message. And so that's why I say it's a coalition effort, right? Because we're lucky in this industry. We have a lot of different folks from different backgrounds and different predilections. But for me, what I was focusing on was a number of different things. Number one, American competitiveness. Okay, so the idea that the United States is really behind in terms of regulation of this space, whether it was things like citing Electric Capital Developer Report and kind of like literal numbers of kind of like developers moving offshore, code commits coming in offshore. That's persuasive to some people, right? To other people, it was consumer protection. This bill actually helps consumer protection move forward and investor protection move forward. Here are examples, boom, 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 whatever, right? So that's, sometimes you go in with that angle. Sometimes you go in with an angle where you're talking about the SEC and the CFTC, right? That is an age-old battleground situation, depending on who the chairs are, right? This helps resolve some of that ambiguity. Some people care about that, right? So you go in with that. So it's really, to be effective in this role, you have to, it's just like being effective in anything. Who am I speaking with? What are their priorities? What do they care about? What do I believe that they already know or don't know? And what is going to be the most important thing on their minds? And in many cases, for people, again, who are off committee, they're not on financial services, they're not on ag, they really bluntly, many of them just don't really care about this that much because it's not really their core issue. But what do they care about? Are they maybe on, do they care about foreign policy? Do they care about national security? Do they care about judiciary? What are the committees they're on? What are the things they focus on daily? And how do you craft something that connects this bill into their priorities? So that to me is being an effective advocate. It's educating effectively. But to answer your question really simply, you don't go in with the same message to any office because the message changes over time as new things emerge and new concerns or questions or whatnot emerge. But you also would never go into, if you're good at this job, which I believe my team and I are excellent at this job, you go in with a message that is relevant to the person that you're talking to. And this is just common sense, but you'd be surprised how many people just have like a sheet and they read the sheet to every single member of Congress, right? And you hit it sometimes, like a clock is right twice a day, but many times people are left being like, I don't know what you're talking about. Why do I care about this, right? So when I get prep docs from my team, I'm very particular. I'm a very particular person sometimes. I'm like, this is what I want to know. What are the last votes they took? What bill did they draft? What committees are they on? What do their constituents care about? What are the main issues happening in their district? This is what I get in prep. I don't get like here prep on the bill. I get prep on like the person, right? And then I'm able to say like, who am I speaking? I have 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes with this person, sometimes on the phone. They're in a car going from place to place. What am I going to say that's going to be interesting to them, right? And it's not the same. It's not the same every time.
Yeah, honestly, when you were describing this, I was like, oh, it's like pitching an article to a publication. Like if it's like about some trend in restaurants, you could pitch it to a business publication, or, you could rewrite it and write it to like a food publication. And anyway, so, okay, I
Right.
understand.
Yeah, the core content's the same, but the delivery mechanism, you switch it up, right? Yeah.
Right. And so, obviously you got 71 Democrats to vote for it, which is incredible. It's well above what most estimates were. Whose votes were you most surprised or most pleased to get? And, what arguments do you think persuaded them?
Yeah. Well, there were a number. I personally, I was super pleased to see folks like Jasmine Crockett come on. She's a young progressive. She's the one that got into it with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Is like a meme person.
Yeah, and they were arguing over each other's looks, which was alarming. But anyway.
Right. But that's the next generation. So for me, whenever I see the next generation of folks in Congress paying attention, that to me is really exciting because I do think.
Is it like, are you specifically saying that's her age? Like, do you know what her age is?
I don't actually have any idea what her age is.
But when you say next generation, you're talking about like younger,
newer to Congress too, right? Because the people who are newer to Congress, people are always like, oh, you want the old people. And I'm like, well, you want the young people because they're starting their careers. I mean, young literally, or young meaning new to this phase of their career. I believe she's both. But the people like that, that you're like, they're the future, right? And so if they're understanding this and they're seeing relevance in it, especially when it's off jurisdiction for them, that's really exciting to me. But I give her as one example, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, getting former Speaker Pelosi on was huge. Obviously was massive, right? Catherine Clark getting the Democratic whip on, the minority whip was massive, right? She had said she wasn't going to whip against this, whipping meaning. So let me back up a little bit. So when a vote is coming, there's a person in Congress who's in the House and in the Senate whose job is called whip. And what they're meant to do is go out there and basically tell their party how to vote and get people to show up. So one thing is like, you got to show up to vote. So be on site. This matters. It's an important vote, whatever. But also here's the position, what it is. And she'd already said you can whip for a vote or against a vote, right? So you can say, come in and vote yay or come in and vote nay. She had said that she wasn't going to whip against, meaning she would not be applying any influence or pressure to tell people to vote no. Okay. But she had not herself said she was going to vote yes. And had not committed to that. And so seeing her come across and actually be supportive was really amazing, really amazing. I thought that was great. There's any number of folks, Ted Lieu, there are a bunch of folks, I think, that came on side that were not obvious. And I think the fact that this spanned the spectrum of moderate Democrats to very progressive Democrats was incredibly rewarding and exciting to me because I've been trying to make the case in the face of, well, I mean, I had to close my Twitter DMs at one point, let's put it that way. Right? I've been trying to make the case that this must be bipartisan. Like it is extremely important that we not, give up on Democrats. And even after the whole, 2022, Sam stuff, when Democrats were very understandably skittish, we at CCI did not give up on them. We were like, listen, that is a thing that happened. We need to like own that happened as an industry. We need to kind of contextualize it appropriately, right? And talk about what that meant and didn't mean about the industry and how the technology operates and all that kind of thing. But we're not giving up on Democrat. We're going to continue to make the case, continue to show up, continue to do the work. And I will tell you, I mean, we didn't get necessarily a ton of support from industry around that position. And we didn't necessarily get a ton of support from Democrats on that position, but we were like, it's too important. And so it has felt at times very exhausting and you question yourself, like, what am I doing here? Is this really a waste of time? Whatever. So to see this happen, it's not just a result of this 2 weeks of work, Laura, it's like 2 years, right? Of staying on side, going in to educate, being told the industry is all scammers and horrible people, not taking it personally, going back again with different arguments, with different evidence, with different people over and over and over to make the case that this is too important to ignore. And message landed, right? Message delivered, 71. I mean, I had my kids, we got a pizza and my kids helped me put 71 on the pizza, because I was like, what on Bitcoin Pizza Day? This all went down. What a huge moment, right? What a huge deal. So Yeah, to say I feel proud is a huge
It
understatement.
brings tears to my eyes to just think about all that effort over years and to have it happen on Bitcoin Pizza Day, like, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it was I'm not gonna lie, we were emotional about it, because again, I mean, people were like, "It's all the Republicans, it doesn't matter, we just have to go with this one party." Not everybody, but a lot of folks were saying that and saying it loudly and getting a lot of traction around that, and to me, I was never convinced that was the right answer. I was absolutely convicted that we had to stay the course, but man, it has, yeah, long time coming.
So I don't want to belabor this too much because I still have so many questions, but I just was so curious, like for the FTX SBF bid, like, what kind of impact do you think has been lasting, and or how much do you think the industry has been able to counteract that? Like, I guess I'm trying to assess like what is the damage you think that's been done that's
Yeah.
still with us, or still with the industry? And then also, what arguments have you found most effective to counter their perceptions on that?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in the long tail. I think there are some folks that still talk about that, but most people really don't. I think, look, I'll say it in a cheeky way. It's a good thing this vote happened this year, not last year. Very different last year, right? But I think that, first of all, his conviction really helped. The fact that he was convicted under existing laws, right? He's in jail. People are, industry is pretty happy about that. We're not like, so I do think that process running its course was the most helpful thing, to be really honest, right? Because we'd been saying this was not about laws, not laws, this, that, the other thing. This was somebody who committed old timey fraud, as I had said in the press at the time. So I think that's helped a lot.
Yeah.
And like I say, I don't think it's completely gone, but in my mind, that's not really a factor anymore. It's not a meaningful factor. We're in that long tail where there are some folks, I think, who are a little skittish, because that's the thing that, and again, it's mostly people that have not been paying attention and tracking it all along, because that was such a big media moment and for so long, right? As I tell my team, I'm like, we're not done yet. There'll be the inevitable HBO Max special or whatever, and then we'll get another, cycle around it, right? But you get like the initial thing, you get the trial, you get the conviction, you get like the Netflix or whatever. That we have one more to go, But I think that most people paying attention realize what can contextualize that pretty effectively. So I did get a
Okay.
couple questions, here and there from folks to whom this was all pretty brand new. And they're like, isn't that the space that guy with the hair did the thing? And I'm like, well, let me tell you what that was and wasn't, right? So a couple of times, but it was really, no one's really talking about it anymore, Laura, to be honest. It's really not,
Okay.
I don't consider it something I feel like I have to go in, on defense about. Whereas again, last year, different situation, but a lot has changed.
Okay. So, one other thing that I just have to call out, which was again so remarkable, is the morning before the vote, the White House also came out and it released a very different statement from the one that had released ahead of the SAB 121 vote,
Yeah.
which had ended, we're going to veto this if you vote this in. And for Fit 21, they said, quote, that the White House looks forward to continued collaboration with Congress on developing legislation for digital assets. So I wondered, what your perception was
Yeah.
for the reversal in the stance on the, or it's not a reversal, but definitely a sea change that we saw from the White House.
Yeah, I mean, huge. I can't huge, really, really, really huge. We had been clued in that it was going to not be calling for a veto, so we knew that part. But again, like I said to you earlier, there's a spectrum of this stuff, right? It can be like not saying it's going to veto, but pretty negative. And this one was about as mild mannered as we could possibly have hoped for, and more than we expected. So it's huge. It's an absolutely massive change. And I do think that's related more to the SAB 121 vote, the Senate vote, than to anything else. I actually think seeing Majority Leader Schumer, break with the White House on that, I think was massive. Like, I think it was a really strong signal sent by Senate Democrats, more than I would say almost anybody else. But I also know that there were folks in the House who were having conversations, for sure. There were leading Democrats in the House that were also, asked about their positions on this, on Fit 21 and all that kind of thing. And the White House, I think, made a very practical and strategic decision to come out, in this mild way. Again, they will put a position out, but, it could have been anything. And I will tell you at this point, almost nothing will surprise me. So if they come out and been like, worst thing ever, terrible, or like, we love this thing, I would have been like, all right, I mean, here we are, but I was, yeah, we were very very happy to see that, and I agree with you. I think it is a sea change is the right. It is a sea change in positioning that the White House has demonstrated
Yeah.
for sure.
So it's kind of amazing because we're about 45 minutes into this episode and we have not discussed the main tenets of the bill. The whole political thing was such a big story that I really wanted to unpack that step by step. But please tell us about Fit 21. What are the main tenets?
Yeah. And look, I mean, I would encourage anyone that's affected by this bill or thinks they will be to go. There's plenty of information about this out there. Okay. And there's a ton of information on specifics, both on the CCI website, but also like all over Twitter. So I won't go necessarily into a boring rundown of like every single thing it talks about. And maybe I'll keep it a bit high level. And then maybe we can kind of follow up there. So the major thing that this bill does, and I talked about this briefly, is that there's these two agencies, the CFTC and the SEC, okay? And so they have oversight by different bodies. Ag Committee oversees the CFTC, and Financial Services and the Senate Banking Committee oversee the SEC. And what's happened, I'll contextualize, over the course of the last number of years, is the SEC has slowly been just taking jurisdiction over things, right? This is called by the industry various things. The most common one is regulation by enforcement. The idea that it's not clear that it is within the SEC's jurisdiction to oversee digital assets based on existing law, and I think that is, I personally believe that absolutely. But nevertheless, the SEC was kind of just engaging in enforcement and creating this kind of bigger playing field around this industry. Okay. And so one of the things I think that's really important about this is this gives a role formally to the CFTC. Now, people have mixed views about this, okay? But it is something I personally believe was going to happen the minute that we all agreed, and I mean, we all agreed, everybody, Gary Gensler included, that Bitcoin's a commodity. The CFTC oversees, essentially spot. And when something is a commodity, there is a room for the CFTC to come in and claim jurisdiction. So this ship had kind of sailed. It was a matter of what is this going to look like? And this talks about like working together, the CFTC and the SEC jointly issuing rules, things like this, right? It also has some interesting provisions that were new that I think don't get a lot of play. I'm going to talk about things we don't get as much play as they do on Twitter. Around whistleblowing, right, during intent to register periods. That was something that was asked for by a couple of members. Insider trading was something people asked about, talking about who's holding what and when and all that kind of thing. So those are things that were interesting because it actually, on consumer protection, kind of noted that there is this, there's other stuff that's happening in this space that's also important. And that's an example of the kinds of things you wouldn't think would necessarily get shoved into a bill like this, but get put in there because somebody asked for it. And they kind of were like, okay, let's see if we can get more votes by adding some of this stuff in. I would say the most, towards the very end of the process, the controversy, a lot of controversy came up around what's called Title II. And Title II is where there's clarification around what is a security, okay? And so without getting into the details around this, and you've had people on to talk about this before as well, what is a security is defined by a set of legal tests, okay? And those legal tests, industry has argued for a long time, don't really cover the realities around digital assets and how they actually operate, how they actually work, okay? So it's not clear, industry has argued, and again, I completely agree with this, of course, that those terms and that kind of test it didn't contemplate, because how could it have the reality of digital assets and how they operate, right? So what do you do? And so right now, this bill in Title II, what it tries to do, or what it does, is clarify that there's securities and there's investment contract assets. And it talks about what investment contract assets are. And again, that's something that's of primary interest to people who are lawyers in this space. But bottom line is it basically defines things in a way that makes it very hard for the SEC to claim that they already have all the laws and rules and everything that they need to regulate the industry effectively. Because again, they don't. So what new ones are needed and kind of what do you do? Okay, so I think there's some of that. There's also part of what industry has talked about and the SEC has put back against is this idea that like things take too long. It's kind of like we don't know where we stand. There's not a process that's established here. And so the idea here is that there are limits on certain kinds of things around how fast the SEC has to get back to people, and things like that are helpful for clarification for industry. So right now you send something into, electronic file and like, you're like, when am I going to hear back around this? There's a little more clarity around that, which is helpful. And again, we could go into all kinds of other things. How do you come in? How do you register? What does that mean? There's stuff about qualified custodians in here. There is, I'm just flipping through this briefing doc. We have a summary of it. There's, here's another really key thing. So right now, one of the main differences in the SEC and the CFTC is that the SEC it doesn't get all its money from Congress, okay? Whereas the CFTC does. And so a big change here that's been talked about for all over the place for a while, but it was also included in this bill, is that the CFTC will get fees. Okay, so there'll be fees when an entity comes in and says, I'm going to register with the CFTC as a variety of whatever it is, I'm going to pay a fee. And so that funding mechanism for the CFTC is something that many folks in Congress have been looking to get for the CFTC for a while. And it is included in this bill. And again, there's pros and cons to that. There people have different views about it, but it's a significant thing that's actually in here as well.
Yeah. So I guess that's because, as far as I understand, I guess the CFTC is much smaller than the SEC.
Right.
And so, one piece of this, which is actually a point that some critics in the crypto industry called out, is they were saying, and especially, I should just name Gabriel Shapiro of Delphi Digital Labs as probably being one of the more outspoken people on this. He said that the bill would give the CFTC authority that it's never had before, which is authority over a spot commodities market, in this case, the crypto markets. So why was that something, because obviously they don't have that right now, right? They do, I guess, when there's a regulated market for futures, but, they don't regulate like Coinbase and stuff like that. So, why was that chosen?
Yeah. Well, so this was a bill that was put together by the Ag Committee and by the House Financial Services Committee. Okay. And Ag Committee has control over the CFTC. And for quite some time, the Ag Committee has been looking for, are you talking about the fees? Sorry, or about the general CFTC inclusion? Because they're different things.
The general CFTC inclusion, but I did see that, Maxine Watt, one of her objections was the fact that she didn't think that the CFTC would have the resources to do it, which is why I assumed there was this fee element to give them more resources to do it. Yeah.
So let's talk about the more threshold question. Okay. And so this is I find this such an interesting conversation. Okay. So when I first joined as CEO of CCI, that was February 22. Okay. And so the big bill that was up in November of that year, or whenever it was, October, whatever it was the DCCPA, which was put forth by Senate Ag Committee. I actually testified about this bill. And there was a lot of discussion.
And I think that was Sam Bankman-Fried's bill, right, that he was pushing.
I mean, he definitely supported that bill. But I think, and I think a lot of people did not support that bill. Our view on the bill, anyway, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is that was the first time that I, in this role, had come across that argument, right? Like the CFTC has a role to play here. And so at the time, when I was getting up to speed on this over the summer of 22, I was asking a bunch of questions and what I wanted to make sure this wasn't an emotional decision on the part of industry, right? Because I'm like, look, everyone's mad at Gary Gensler. Russ Benham's been pretty quiet, but what makes you assume that the next chair of the CFTC is not going to be more like a Gary Gensler than like a Russ Benham? You don't know who you're going to get. And so you should be thinking more long-term about these agencies and about, what it is that they have authority over. Okay. So that was my starting place, was not to say yes, no, whatever. It was just to ask the question, is industry generally supportive of this? Because a lot of folks beyond Sam were supportive of that bill, at least parts of the bill. I should be very clear. None of us ever came around, well, most of us didn't come around on the DeFi provisions of the bill, but on the other things, a bunch of industry was actually supportive of that bill in its broad strokes. Okay. So, and there was a long process that was going to be had if that thing ever had really moved forward. It never, there was a long process. So there's a lot of, the question was, do you engage on it or do you not? And our take on it was you engage on it because when there's language, you want to engage on language because language is real. And if you aren't at the table, you're on the menu. So you should better engage in the process, right? So that was our take on that. Now, that being said, I do think there are good reasons that you want to have a multi-agency approach to this. Okay. And I think there are good reasons why you wouldn't. And a lot of those depend on the specific four corners of how a firm operates and the approach the firm takes, which is why I say, I personally have no judgment around people who are opposed to this bill because I think it's a very individual analysis. And anybody who's working at one particular company is going to have a take on that because it may or may not be beneficial for their particular company. And that is a very valid, legitimate point of view. My job is to look out for a much broader set of stakeholders, right? And when I see a bill that's going to move things forward for most of the industry and may not be great on some things, but isn't bad necessarily on those things, I think that my role is to help move those things forward. And that's what my job is. That's why I'm in this role and not some other roles. But in general, I think the reality is we have look, I could talk all day about the absolute absurdity of how many agencies we have and the sort of alphabet soup of agencies that we have in the United States. Okay. But what I'll just say is contrast Singapore. People are like, oh, Singapore got regulations that fast. They have one agency, the Monetary Authority of Singapore. One. Okay. It's not that hard to coordinate one agency. We've got a billion agencies that involve in financial services. Okay. We're not even talking about the prudential regulators, the OCC, the FDIC. We're not even getting into all of that. We have a tremendously complicated agency structure. And in my view, the reality is you have to talk about defining what all those agencies do and don't do. And if expansion of something into the CFTC, that's been on the table for a long time. In my view, this is a milder expansion than many other options on the table. And also, the reality is there's another process that's going through. So people who have objections are going to be absolutely able to talk about those objections as this thing goes forward into the Senate, right? There's a chance for people to log criticisms that they haven't maybe yet logged. But I will also say, as I noted, this bill has been around in some form for a long time. So people haven't gone in there and said their views and put that in there. There's also responsibility on the part of industry, right? This bill was not drafted in like 2 weeks in a cloakroom and suddenly released. Like it's been around in an incarnation for years. So a lot of folks have gone in and logged their views and asked for amendments and contested language and all of that, and that's part of the process, whether we like it or not. So, on some level, the CFTC ship has sailed. The question that we are all going to have to wrestle with is, what is the role of the CFTC? Not does the CFTC have a role, right? The CFTC does and is going to have a role. Again, opinions on that differ. Those views are legitimate. I'm not here to contest any of that, right? I think, again, people are going to have different views based on what they see, what's relevant to them, what narrow things are crucially important to them versus generally important to them. But the idea that we're going to have any bill that gets through either body that doesn't acknowledge the CFTC is a fallacy. It's just not going to happen ever.
Yeah, I don't think people are objecting to them having any role. It's more like, why are they now in this new role? But
the role is going to be new, though, right? Any role they take is going to be new. So if saying they should have a role, then what's the role? It's got to be a role, and that's kind of like, is there a different role? But you know what I'm saying? Otherwise, there's no role. But if you acknowledge they need a role, then the question becomes, well, what is the role? Right? Which is going to be new, which is going to necessarily be new because it is new. So that's what I'm kind of saying. Yeah.
Okay. And so I definitely have to ask about two other things that I'm sure people are very curious about. So let's say this were to become law, which I'm just going to tell the listeners right off the bat that the chances of that at this moment in time look, pretty slim. But if it were, then let's say that there was a team that wanted to launch a new token. They have some idea for some project, it involves a token. What would be the process for them under this bill?
So some of those rules are still going to have to be promulgated, the specifics around that. Okay. But the first assessment, you'd have a different assessment than you have now. So right now, I don't want to say this in a way that sounds, flippant. There's an element of kind of like YOLOing to this. Okay. Like when you launch a token, because you're like, I don't really know if the agency is it this one? What are the rules? How decentralized do I need to be? What does that mean? There's ambiguity here, which is exactly why people are not doing that. They're doing it in other jurisdictions where there's clarity. So the clarity everyone's calling for is like, what does it mean? There is more now. And I think there's an ability to do a more clear analysis of what to do depending on the outcome that you're seeking. Okay. And that is kind of, I think, what everyone has wanted is like, okay, now we have a little bit more clarity around what to do. If something is, an investment contract, if it's security, if it's this, if it's that, you could choose to launch a token as a security. Okay. You could make that decision and it's clearer what that path is. You could choose to launch it as very clearly not a security. There is now a path to what that looks like. Again, the details are going to be determined in part by some of the consultations that are required by this between the CFTC and SEC, et cetera. But the whole point here is to land some, I'm going to say security, but some security, some clarity is a better word around how to do it and what to do. So the point is, where before there was not really any sort of process and everyone was kind of like, I don't know, someone else did that and that seemed to work, so maybe I'll do what they did, but I don't really know if that worked. Now there will actually be some parameters around a process that will allow people to at least skirt away from like known landmines, as opposed to just kind of like crossing their fingers and hoping for the best, which I would say has been the approach of very brave folks who have done this. So
yes.
I think that's why it's such a huge improvement.
Yeah, yeah, and obviously some of them have stepped in the landmine, or the SEC's thrown the
Or
landmine at them. However
deliberately,
you want to, yeah.
there it is. Yeah, the land it's been lobbed at them. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, on a related topic, obviously, people have been concerned time and again about how DeFi would be treated in any legislation. We've seen multiple times that regulation tends to try to enforce the traditional structure of having the regulation be targeted at an intermediary, which, the people that are involved in DeFi would say, that's not possible, it's not workable. So, how does this particular bill treat DeFi?
Yeah, it's funny you said not workable because that's actually the language I used when I testified on DCCPA. I said it's not workable, right? Because I understood what the intent was, but I'm like, there's just no way to, like, it's literally not workable. There is no way to comply with this because it doesn't even make sense in the context of DeFi. I think this is better, but not all the way good. Okay. Better than kind of that approach, but not all the way good. And I think what the attempt is here is to kick the can on DeFi. And I think most people kind of get that. And so that's exactly what we saw in MiCA, the bill that came down in Europe. Also not perfect, but people have been able to work around it effectively, and I think that's important to note. Very not perfect, but people are working with it. Um, and the idea there was DeFi is too new, and I was part of the behind the scenes on MiCA in my previous job, talking to a bunch of people, educating them about everything from clouds to DeFi to whatever it was. But the bottom line there is we don't know. It's too soon. Let's do a study. Let's kick the can and figure this out. Meanwhile, this other stuff's been around for a while. It's suffering from a lack of clarity. Let's land it. Let's land that plane. The plane we can land, let's land. The thing that's in flight, let's acknowledge it's in flight. Okay. That is the approach I think that's taken here. Is it perfect? It's not perfect. Okay. Do I wish the carve outs were really, really delineated? I do, right? But I do think it sufficiently distinguishes centralized things, let's say, from decentralized things in a way that makes it clear that decentralized things, including, by the way, developers and other folks who work on decentralized projects, are not meant to be captured in the bulk of this thing. And to me, that is a big deal. I think it is being underrepresented, I think, by some. But it's not everything, to be clear, right? It's not everything. And so, like I say, that's why any individual actor or person or firm is going to have to form their own opinion about this, because depending on where you fall and how crucial clarity in that area is to you, or how crucial certain kinds of carve outs are to you, you may or may not be thinking this is sufficient. But like from an industry play, the acknowledgement of the difference, in my opinion, is significant. I think it matters. It indicates attention was paid. There's an understanding on the part of the members of Congress and the folks who voted on this to varying degrees that it's not monolithic. Industry is not monolithic, and they're trying to land the plane they can land. And I personally am very appreciative of those efforts, which have been a long time coming.
All right. So I know this question is going to be a little bit broad, but since we just said that it's, probably more likely than not that this particular bill will not become law. We have this whole landscape of things now that have shifted. And there's also things that existed before that now maybe are going to be seen in a new light. So we have this bill, which did, get this bipartisan vote. We have the statement from the White House saying that they're open to, trying to formulate some new digital asset legislation. We have the Lemus Gillibrand bill in the Senate, which, I don't know what the current status of that is, but that's been floating around. People have been talking about stablecoin legislation. I mean, there's like a whole sea of things. And then we've also had the sea change, as we discussed from both the Democrats and the White House. So, just looking at all those things, plus anything else that I have forgotten to mention, what would you guess would be kind of like the next things to happen? Oh, and by the way, also we have an election coming up. So when you look at just that whole mix of things, what do you think are kind of the more likely things to happen for the crypto industry when it comes to either policy, regulation, et cetera?
Yeah. Anyone who tries to predict in this case it's an exercise in futility and foolishness. But I will indulge you. Like who knows, right? It's a show that is constantly writing itself. The script is writing itself, like in sort of improv time. That being said, let's look at the calendar. Okay, so the reality is we have to the end of this session, which ends around the summer, and then we have the lame duck period, as everyone calls it, which is the period of time after the election, but before the office's turnover. Okay. And the question that's really hot on the Hill right now is what could go through now and what could maybe go through in lame duck. Okay. And of course, lame duck is affected 100%. The biggest factor affecting lame duck is the election. Who's still in office, who's not, who got a seat, who didn't. Will leadership change in the next cycle or not? So will Sherrod Brown still be leader of the Senate Banking Committee or the chair, or will it be a Republican? Will it be somebody else? Like, who knows, right? If Sherrod Brown's not there, who's the next person? So all of those factors come into play for lame. So let's leave lame duck aside, but recognize that is a very important moment, and things do go through in lame duck all the time. It's very common. So even if things don't go through in this session, the active session right now, before everyone just turns to the campaign trail, they may happen next, and we are keeping a close eye on that. Personally, I think if a stablecoin package of some kind doesn't get attached to something, whether it's this, whether it's something else, I think that there is a good shot in lame duck of getting some portions, at least, of that through. Because for stablecoins, there's pretty widespread agreement on both the Senate and House sides, really, about what that should look like. It's not agreed upon. It's really more of the politics around it and other things that I think are making it complicated. So that bill, also the various options or iterations of it, had been around for quite a while. People have all kinds of people have weighed in on it and whatnot. So let's see. In this short term, well, you've got FIT, right? So FIT, there's going to be a lot of activity in the Senate over the next weeks, basically trying to figure out who's where, what do people think. There isn't currently what's called a companion bill. So a lot of times, for something to go really efficiently, the House is working on something, the Senate's working on something, and they're on the same topic, and they're coordinating, and whatnot, and the language is similar. And so what happens is the House approves their version, Senate approves their version. There's kind of like a comparison around it, right? Sometimes it has to go back or forth or whatever, and they come to an agreement, and the thing goes to the president's desk. In this case, there isn't actually a companion bill. Okay. Now, that being said, the DCCPA, which we talked about, is going to come back into force. It's going to be relevant because that's the last time Senate Ag looked at the CFTC issues was there, and there was some agreement on that. So my expectation is that some version of that is going to come back into play, not that bill itself. And it only talks about Ag, to be clear. It doesn't talk about the SEC because that's not the jurisdiction of that committee. Something like that, I'm sure as we speak, is being talked about with Senate banking staff. They're going back and forth on it. What do we think about this version? They're analyzing FIT 21, which they've been doing. They're looking at the language. Do we support it? Do we not? Et cetera. But there's going to be some, I don't know if lag's the right word because things can go fast when people are motivated, but there's definitely that hiccup that there isn't an obvious companion bill to vote on quickly and then kind of do the compromising, right? And we're on a calendar. We have a limited amount of time left in this session before they're done for the summer and they're off doing other things, right? Can it get through? Can it get floor time? Can it get committee time? All of those things. It depends on how motivated people are, right? That is a big factor here. There are a lot of things the Senate needs to consider, a lot of things they need to consider. And is this going to rise? I believe it will. I believe there is sufficient attention from the White House on the campaign trail, from the House. There is sufficient pressure that the Senate, I do think, is taking this very seriously. What that will look like, my team, we're literally in the process of thinking about that right now. So I don't even want to speculate, but it is going to be, it's not going to be super straightforward. It is going to be like anything else in this Congress, complicated and probably messy, and a lot of things will go on. Now, what's the flip side of that? What's the good news there? The good news there is a chance to get in there and talk about things in this bill, in the House version, that maybe we'd love to see a little more refined, right? Maybe we'd like to see pulled out and reserved for another time, whatever it is. There's a chance to go in there and have those conversations because it's not baked. It's not a fully baked situation. And that is good news, right? That means there is an opportunity for the things that maybe, are complicated to talk about for people that have those feelings about stuff, right? It is unlikely that the Senate, because this never happens just because of the nature of politics, they're not going to come in and be like, what a great bill. Ray, we love it. Let's do it. Let's go, guys. That's just not a thing that ever happens. Okay. So, hey, that doesn't happen. So what the sausage making looks like, it's gonna vary. Now, a thing I will note is you pointed out, Majority Leader Schumer on SAB 121, okay, indicated, look, we shouldn't overly read into anyone's vote on things. People vote or don't vote, just like any individual voter. They vote or don't vote for a variety of reasons, okay? But what I do think that vote indicated, and the votes by other senior Democrats on that in the Senate on SAB 121, is we take this stuff seriously. We don't approve of the idea that it's not important. We think it's important. We think that something about the way the SEC did this was at best. Okay. Whether that's APA issues, whether there's all kinds of reasons, right? And they've said different things at different points in time, et cetera.
Yeah, Administrative Procedure Act for people who don't know what that is.
So was it a process footfall, a substance footfall? Various folks in the Senate have various views on that. Okay. But for whatever reason, enough of them put their hands up and said, not today. That doesn't work. Okay. And that demonstrates, I do think, a renewed openness to having conversations about this topic. And Fit 21 is the vehicle to have those conversations. So, like I say, I feel, look, I'm always hopeful because I'm a hopeful person. I couldn't have done 2 years of slogging, and then, like we talked about, like without being a hopeful person, maybe like a delusional person. I don't know, where you can interpret how you will. Regardless, it seemed to work. So here we are. I am hopeful. But again, the major limit here is limited calendar time. There just are only so many days for things to be discussed. And this is complicated. It's not an easy topic. And so is it going to get the attention that it needs to get through the entire process? Again, I believe yes, but this is a world we live in. God forbid some other horrible thing happens out in the world that requires Senate attention. That, who knows, right? Like there are all kinds of things that could derail attention. I would say rightfully so, in some cases of true horrors, around some of this stuff, right? And we just have to kind of hope for many reasons that doesn't happen. But like I say, if it does, there's always lame duck. There's always lame duck, right? So hope is not lost.
So you mentioned the SEC, and I did just have to ask, and I understand this may not be in your wheelhouse, but obviously now because the Ether ETFs have gotten the initial approval, I wondered what you thought that meant for the reports that the SEC was investigating ETH and the Ethereum Foundation. Do you think that means that that's off, or I don't know if you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't really have thoughts on that. I've heard about it kind of the same way I think you've heard about it. I will say that there are people who have much more, including on my team, who have much more line of sight into the SEC and tend to have, and there are some folks, not on my team, unfortunately, who seem to have an almost uncanny sense of like predicting enforcement actions by the SEC, for example, right? I am not such a person, sad to say, or maybe happy to say, I don't know. I guess it goes both ways. But yeah, look, I'm just going to say this in a way I hope it does not mean, and not intending to be ominous, nothing would surprise me. Okay. And what I will say, and I will say this as a caution to people who are, I think, dancing maybe a bit too much, and I think understandably so, this is not an SEC that will give an inch without taking a mile. And we know that. So we got, ETH ETFs. We're step one. I mean, to be clear, like we're step one, then we have the next steps, right? So we have these steps towards that process. But that doesn't preclude the SEC from coming around and doing something else, right? Those are distinct things. And like I say, I think we should always have our eyes wide open when it comes to, any regulator, I suppose, but certainly this particular agency and the way that they have tended to do things. I will say that we have heard, I don't know if these are how substantiated these are, but it's made its way to me, so I'd assume pretty substantiated. There are rumors of pending enforcement action of one that is coming. I have no idea against who. I do not know anything other than that. And again, these are rumors. I tend to take them with a grain of salt. That being said, it would not surprise me if while you're holding the trophy, you get the right hook. That is not an unusual way of doing business for this SEC. So, like I say, I am a person that does not count votes till they're counted. While we have a chair here who has been overtly hostile to the industry, I am not, I'm not turning my back on the agency. But in that sort of case you talked about, I have no knowledge. I don't know anything other than what you suggested. I have no insight into that, whatsoever. And I think that every time an enforcement action has come down, people have been pretty blindsided by it. And you know that as well as I. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to see. So, last question for you. I know we've gone so long, but there's been so much to discuss. The crypto industry obviously has suddenly pivoted to discussing a lot of political stuff over the last few weeks. And, one moment that really set a lot of things off was an op-ed run in Blockworks by Molly Jane Zuckerman saying that basically people shouldn't be single issue voters. I think she literally used the word fool to describe people who were. And, afterward, we saw Kavita Gupta, who tweeted something like, as a woman in crypto, am I going to be forced to choose between my body and my career or my industry? You are a Democrat. There's been other people on the show, for instance, Robert Leshner on the Chopping Block said, I'm a lifelong Democrat. What do I do? Obviously now so much has happened even just since those discussions just a few weeks ago. And because you are a Democrat, as you mentioned, I wondered sort of what your take was on where the Democratic Party stands at this moment and, where you think that might go between now and Election Day.
Yeah. So Justin Slaughter and I read an op-ed last week, this week, again, I have no idea, recently, that when it's a series. So we had our first op-ed that came out a while ago that was about progressivism and how we actually think progressivism and decentralization are compatible or highly compatible. And it's surprising to us that there's been this distinction. I think that was quite influential in getting some progressives to pay attention. I'm really proud of that. And then we did one recently that basically was like, hey, Democrats, all is not lost. There is this trend, but it can be turned around. And I think we wrote in there something I think Justin wrote this is really funny. You don't have to like tattoo I heart crypto on your forehead, right? It's just an openness and awareness of the importance of this industry and that it's not going away, right? It does have merits and challenges, benefits and challenges. And it's something that we should be really trying to keep on shore in the US through a variety of paths. Like that would suffice for a lot of people. Like I don't know, the folks you cited in their personal views. I know them both. I haven't talked to them about that specifically. But, I think for a lot of people, they want to vote with their party. Like they do want to stay in the party that they've been in for their, entire voting lives or whatever, right? They need a reason. And that reason doesn't have to be, full embrace, bear hug, the situation. It has to be an openness to being educated, to listening. And if I can be reassuring, I will tell you over this last push that we've had, there is a lot of openness on the part of Democrats across the entire spectrum, from centrist all the way to hyper progressive, various individuals to have those conversations and to make up their own minds, right? And so the idea that the parties are a monolith is not true. We've clearly seen the idea that President Biden or his administration or the folks in it are setting the tone for the entire Democratic Party. That's not true. And we know that because, again, you don't know what someone really, really is going to do until they vote. And now we have the votes to prove. So we've been saying this for a while. We've been saying this out loud to a lot of people for a long time. Don't give up on Democrats. The idea that they're not going to show up is crazy. It's not true. You're not helping by shouting at them. We need to be like as open as we ever were. And some of the hits we deserve, right? Some of the things that are being lobbed at us are true. Some of these things did happen. We need to own it and talk about how we're doing better as an industry, which we are. Talk about how we're self-policing, which we are. And talk about how this is an opportunity that applies to everybody in the world, not just Republicans or libertarians or whatever, right? That's not helpful if your goal is to get policy. It's just not helpful. So I think that has been validated, and then some. And I feel personal pride in that. I think I'm displaying very clearly. I feel personal pride in that. But I also think that until the votes are in, the votes are not in. And this stuff is going to change, and it can change. And we've seen it now. It can change fast. It can change fast. So my view on this is, if you're a Democrat, all is not lost, to say the least. I would also say my personal view. Okay, I'll just say this in a somewhat cheeky way. Read into this what you will, and I won't go further on it. But maybe laws don't matter so much if there is no rule of law. I'll just put that out there. Okay, it's like you know what I'm saying. Like perhaps something more fundamental is at stake in at least part of this election, which is democracy, rule of law. These kind of like being able to rely on like a process with things. Like I think some of these things are really important. And, I just don't want industry to think. Sometimes I look at some of the rhetoric and I think it's deck chairs on the Titanic. Okay. Like if the whole system of American democracy is going to crash, I don't want to be melodramatic about this, but if the whole system is going to crash, maybe some of this fine tuning is a luxury, and we should be looking at the bigger picture. But I also think at the end of the day, Congress makes laws. There are a lot of people in Congress. There are 535 of them. Okay. 100 senators, 435 representatives. And every one of them, in my view, with a couple of exceptions, is in play. They are all, in my opinion, part of this is my job, to be fair, but with a couple of very clear exceptions, and we all know who those exceptions are, okay? Everybody else, in my opinion, really is in play. And they are people that could be educated about the importance of the technology if we took an approach where we saw that as our responsibility to do that. And we didn't like flail about, sometimes like demanding attention when we're not actually going in and doing the work to educate. So I will just say that is the approach that I believe is successful. That's the approach I take with the team at CCI supports, and I'm happy to see more and more folks in industry, I think, coming around to that position, that particularly after some of the things that happened in 22, we had a hole to dig out of, and it was our responsibility to do that, right? It's our responsibility to go in and educate. It's not always their responsibility, as much as we wish it were, to come out and like seek that information, right? Like they have to have a reason to want the information. And this vote was an example. They had a reason to want the information. When they got it, they took it in, they heard it, and they acted in a way that I think is very beneficial, frankly, to industry. So what more could I ask for?
Yeah. That part where you said that basically, like when it came time to the vote, they realized they needed to educate themselves. I realized like, oh, okay, yeah, probably a lot of these people just didn't really have an opinion. And then when they learned about it, they did.
That's right. Like anything else, right? Like anything else.
Yeah, like it's sort of like deadline oriented, like, you're the student cramming for the test.
Who among us has not? It's like, I'll go back to like, you and I are voters, right? I vote in every election since I turned of age. And like, I look at that ballot sometimes and I'm like, I don't know what the hell that thing is, right? And you have I need an opinion. I got to vote. I got to figure it out. Sometimes that's what people do until it's in front of them. It's not on their radar. And like on some level, why should it be, right? Why should it be? So when it is, if you go in with appropriate messaging, I think everyone is because the technology is, this is all my personal conviction, right? I mean, I know you share this as well. It's so important. Like what we are building as an industry and what we are building as users of these systems is so incredibly important. And it's important for a variety of different reasons. But when you go in and you talk with that kind of passion about it, people do listen when they have a reason to pay attention. So there it is.
All right, Sheila. Well, this was truly fascinating. Thank you so much for also going over time. I really appreciate it. Where can people learn more about you and CCI?
Yeah, well, we're on Twitter. I will say I'm not very good at, or X or whatever. I'm not very good at it, but I'm trying. I do a bunch of threads where I try to explain things. They're a bit nerdy, but they seem to get some traction. I will say I posted my first meme. I was pretty proud of it. I thought it was kind of funny. It took me 10 seconds. And I was like, why is this the thing that gets all the, whatever. Fine. So we're there. Of course, we have our website, cryptocouncil.org. And the folks on the team, of course, I just want to shout out, G. Kim, Ryan Egan, Brett Quick, Amanda Russo, Pat Kirby, our kind of team DC that's really focusing, Peter Herzog, who's our state guy. We've got folks in Brussels and London. So yeah, information through our Twitter handle, which is crypto_council, mine, any of the folks I mentioned. And then, of course, our website gives information as well. We have explainers, we have briefs, we have like one-pagers on how Congress works, how the European Parliament works. So if those processes are interesting to people, we found those to be really helpful to folks in industry to just get a sense of like, what is happening? What is this moment about? What does this mean? But we also have explainers and briefs for members of Congress or their staff on things, everything from, what's MEV, what's decentralization, that they also pull down a lot and use as well. So yeah, thanks for asking.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on Unchained.
Thank you.
Did you know Unchained is much more than a podcast? Last year, we unveiled a completely redesigned website, enriching your experience with the latest news, insightful analysis, compelling op-eds, and comprehensive learning articles and guides for beginners. Explore all this and more at unchainedcrypto.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. To learn more about Sheila, FIT21, and CCI, check out the show notes for this episode. Unchained is produced by me, Laura Shin, with help from Matt Pilchard, Juan Aranovich, Megan Gavis, Pam Majumdar, and Marka Correa. Thanks for listening. Unchained is now a part of the CoinDesk Podcast Network. For the latest in digital assets, check out Markets Daily, 5 days a week, with host Noel Atchison. Follow the CoinDesk Podcast Network for some of the best shows in crypto.